It was an ordinary afternoon in the quiet neighborhood, at least. It seemed that way. Birds chirped in the distance. Children played on the sidewalks. And the sun cast long shadows over the pavement. But tranquility shattered when a man, his face twisted with irritation, lashed out with his foot, striking a stray dog that had wandered too close. A yelp of pain cut through the air, drawing the attention of passers-by. The man smirked, pleased with himself, unaware that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Because this was no ordinary dog. And its owner? None other than the legendary Mike Tyson. The dog whimpered, staggering back, its deep brown eyes filled with both pain and confusion. It was a strong, well-built canine, muscular, like its owner, but even the toughest creatures had their limits. A few bystanders gasped, some shaking their heads in disapproval. But no one dared to intervene. The cruel man sneered, brushing off the concerned looks around him. "Stupid mutt," he muttered, dusting off his shoe as if he had just kicked a piece of trash. Then, from behind him, a deep, unmistakable voice rang out, "You shouldn't have done that." The man turned sharply, his smirk faltering as he locked eyes with someone he immediately recognized. Standing a few feet away, clad in a casual hoodie and sweatpants, was Mike Tyson himself, the former heavyweight champion of the world, the man whose fists had dropped legends in the ring. Tyson's gaze was cold, his expression unreadable, but his presence alone sent a chill down the man's spine. The dog, his dog, limped toward him, and Tyson crouched down, running a gentle hand over its fur. His jaw tightened as he examined the spot where the cruel man's foot had landed. "You okay, champ?" Tyson murmured, his voice low but filled with concern. The dog licked his hand in response, tail wagging weakly. The cruel man suddenly felt a prickle of sweat at the back of his neck. He had seen Mike Tyson on TV, watched his devastating knockouts, even laughed at the stories of his explosive temper. But now, standing in front of him, he realized something chilling. There was no referee here, no cameras, no ring to separate them. Tyson slowly rose to his feet. His fists weren't clenched. He didn't raise his voice. But his presence alone was suffocating. "Tell me," Tyson said, tilting his head slightly, "do you like picking on things weaker than you?" The cruel man swallowed hard. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The cruel man forced a chuckle, trying to mask his growing unease. "Look, man, it's just a dog. It got in my way," he said, taking a step back. Tyson didn't move. He just stood there, staring, his expression unreadable. "A dog," Tyson repeated slowly. "Just a dog." His voice was calm, but there was something about the way he said it that made the man's stomach twist. Around them, the small crowd that had gathered stayed silent, waiting, sensing that something was about to happen. "You know," Tyson continued, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, "I've met a lot of tough guys in my life. Guys who could fight, guys who talked big, but you know what I always noticed?" The man shook his head slightly, unsure whether to respond. "They never pick on the weak." The cruel man scoffed, trying to regain some control of the situation. "Come on, man, are you seriously making a big deal out of this? It's just..." Before he could finish, Tyson took a single step forward. Just one, but it was enough. The way he moved, effortless, controlled, like a lion deciding whether or not to pounce, made the cruel man's breath hitch. He had seen Tyson's knockouts before, seen him take down men twice his size with a single punch. And now, for the first time in his life, he understood what true fear felt like. "Apologize," Tyson said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, his pride battling with his survival instincts. Tyson's gaze darkened, too. The dog. For a long moment, silence hung between them. The cruel man glanced at the dog, then back at Tyson. His heart pounded. He didn't know if Tyson was going to hit him, but he didn't want to find out. Swallowing his pride, he cleared his throat and crouched down. His voice came out hoarse. Sorry, dog." The dog just stared at him, its tail still, its brown eyes unblinking. Tyson nodded. "Good." The tension in the air seemed to ease, but only slightly. Tyson turned to leave, giving the man one last glance. "Next time," he said, "pick on someone your own size." Then, without another word, he whistled for his dog and walked away. The cruel man let out a shaky breath. His hands trembled. He had never felt so small in his life. And as he watched Mike Tyson disappear into the distance, he knew one thing for certain: he would never, ever kick a dog again. The cruel man stood frozen, his heart still hammering against his ribs. The murmurs of the crowd around him started to fade as they lost interest, shaking their heads and walking away. But he could still feel the weight of Tyson's gaze, even though the former champion was already disappearing down the street with his dog. He exhaled sharply, wiping the sweat off his forehead. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, glancing around to see if anyone was still staring. A few lingering eyes made him feel smaller than ever. Anger flared up inside him, burning away the humiliation. "It's just a damn dog," he whispered again, clenching his fists. He wasn't used to feeling like this, weak, insignificant. He had spent years making sure people feared him. Now, in a matter of minutes, Tyson had stripped that away without even touching him. No, he couldn't let this slide. His pride wouldn't allow it. With a deep breath, he took a step forward in the direction Tyson had gone. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let this be the end of it. Tyson walked at a steady pace, his dog trotting beside him, still slightly limping but recovering quickly. He reached down and gave it a reassuring pat. "You're good, boy," he murmured. "You're strong." They turned the corner onto a quieter street, where the noise of the city faded into a gentle hum. Tyson liked walking here. It was peaceful, a place where he could think. But today, something gnawed at him. He had seen that look in the cruel man's eyes before. He had seen it in the ring, in the faces of beaten men who couldn't accept defeat, in those who had been humbled and hated the taste of it. And he had learned, long ago, that men like that were dangerous. Without breaking stride, Tyson glanced at a car window as he passed. The reflection showed what he already suspected. The man was following him. Tyson sighed. He really hoped he wouldn't have to hurt anyone today. As Tyson turned another corner, he slowed his pace, pretending to admire the old buildings lining the street. He could hear the hurried footsteps behind him, unsteady, filled with hesitation. The cruel man followed, his hands still clenched, his jaw tight. Adrenaline pumped through his veins, blurring his judgment. The humiliation was too fresh, too raw to let go. "Hey," he shouted, voice cracking slightly. "I'm not done talking to you." Tyson stopped, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath. He turned around, his eyes calm, yet piercing, like a storm held back by sheer will. The man stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure of his plan. His bravado flickered, but his pride pushed him forward. "You think you can just walk away after threatening me?" Tyson raised an eyebrow. "Threaten you?" He shook his head slowly. "If I wanted to threaten you, you'd know." The man's face flushed. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? Just because you're some big-time boxer?" Tyson took a step closer, closing the distance between them. His voice softened, dangerously calm. "This isn't about boxing," he said. "This is about respect. You don't kick a dog just because you're having a bad day." The man sneered, though his voice wavered. "You don't know me. You don't know what kind of day I've had." Tyson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Maybe not, but I know anger. I know what it does, how it eats you up inside. Makes you do things you'll regret." The man swallowed, the bravado slipping. "I don't regret anything," he lied, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyson tilted his head, studying him. "Maybe not yet," he said, "but you will." A tense silence stretched between them. For a moment, it seemed like the man might lunge forward, anger still simmering beneath the surface. But then, Tyson did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card. He held it out, his gaze unwavering. "What's this?" the man asked, suspicion lacing his words. "A chance," Tyson replied, "to get your act together. There's a gym on that card, good people. Real fighters. Go there, learn some discipline, learn what real strength looks like." The man stared at the card, his hand hovering uncertainly before snatching it. "You think I need charity?" Tyson shook his head. "Not charity, just a choice. You can stay angry, keep hurting others, or you can do something better." The man looked down at the card, then back up at Tyson, conflict flickering in his eyes. For the first time, his hands loosened at his sides. His fingers brushed against the edges of the card, rough and slightly bent, as if it had been carried in Tyson's pocket for a long time. given to many others before him. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You really think some gym is gonna change anything?" Tyson shrugged. "That's up to you." The man let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Man, you don't get it. People like me, we don't get second chances." Tyson took another slow step forward, his presence still powerful, but now lacking any hostility. His voice was firm but not unkind. "You got one right now." The man swallowed hard. His instincts told him to toss the card away, to curse Tyson out and walk off like he didn't care. But something about the way Tyson looked at him, like he had seen men like him before, like he understood, made it impossible to just brush off. A long silence stretched between them. The dog, now sitting calmly at Tyson's side, gave a small whine, as if sensing the shift in the air. It was strange. Just moments ago, this animal had been something he thoughtlessly kicked aside. Now, it sat next to one of the most dangerous men alive, looking at him with an odd kind of patience. The man clenched his jaw. He wanted to stay angry. Anger was easy. It was familiar. But now, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what to do. His grip on the card tightened. Tyson watched him, then finally gave a small nod. "Think about it." And with that, he turned around and walked away, his dog following closely at his side. The man stayed rooted in place, the street lights casting long shadows around him. He looked down at the card once more. The gym's name was simple. Nothing flashy. Just a place for fighters. For people willing to work for something real. He exhaled sharply, shoving the card into his pocket. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe it was just another moment he'd forget by morning. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a way out. The cruel man stood there for a long moment, staring at the ground, the business card still pressing against his fingertips inside his pocket. The streets had quieted, the faint hum of the city blending with the distant sound of footsteps, Tyson's footsteps, disappearing into the night. He let out a slow breath, his mind tangled in a storm of emotions. He should just throw the damn card away, walk off like nothing happened, go back to his usual life, where no one told him what to do, where he didn't owe anyone anything. But something stopped him. His fingers curled around the card, pulling it out again. The name of the gym stared back at him. He read it once, then twice. With a grunt, he shoved it back into his pocket and turned, heading in the opposite direction. He needed a drink. The next morning, the cruel man woke up with a pounding headache. His apartment was a mess, empty bottles on the table, a broken chair in the corner from some drunken outburst he barely remembered. He groaned, running a hand over his face, trying to shake off the hangover. But when he reached into his pocket, his fingers brushed against something small and stiff. The card. For a moment, he just stared at it. The previous night came rushing back, Tyson's voice, his dog's watchful eyes, the way that single step forward had made his entire body lock up in fear. His jaw tightened. Without thinking too much about it, he grabbed his jacket, shoved the card into his back pocket, and headed out the door. The gym wasn't far, tucked away between an old auto shop and a laundromat. The sign was faded, the windows slightly fogged from years of sweat and training. It wasn't the kind of place with fancy equipment or state-of-the-art facilities. It was a fighter's gym. He hesitated at the entrance. His reflection stared back at him in the glass door, unkempt, tired, still carrying the weight of his past mistakes on his shoulders. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he didn't belong here. But then, as if summoned by fate itself, a deep voice behind him made him freeze. "Didn't think I'd see you here." Slowly, he turned. Mike Tyson stood just a few feet away, watching him with the same piercing gaze as the night before. No judgment, no mockery, just a challenge. "Well?" Tyson asked, crossing his arms. "You coming in? Are you gonna run?" The cruel man swallowed hard, his fists clenched at his sides. And then, before he could stop himself, he reached for the door handle. The cruel man hesitated for only a second before pushing the door open. The smell of sweat, old leather, and determination hit him instantly. Inside, the gym was alive with movement, heavy bags swinging, gloves smacking against pads, bodies weaving and dodging under the dim fluorescent lights. A few heads turned as he stepped in, but no one paid him much attention. This was a place for fighters. And unless you proved yourself, you were just another face walking through the door. Tyson followed him inside, nodding toward an older man standing near the ring. "That's Eddie. He runs this place." Eddie was in his 60s. His face weathered from years of fights. His arms still thick with muscle. He eyed the newcomer with quiet interest, then turned to Tyson. "You vouching for this guy?" Tyson glanced at the cruel man, then shrugged. "Nah, just giving him a shot." Eddie smirked. "That's more than most get." He turned back to the cruel man. "You got a name?" For a moment, he thought about lying, about giving some fake name and keeping himself detached. But something about the weight of the moment made him hesitate. "Rick." Eddie nodded. "All right, Rick. You ever boxed before?" Rick shifted uncomfortably. "I've fought." Eddie chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, I can see that. But fighting and boxing? Two different things." He jerked his head toward the ring. "If you're serious, get in there. Let's see what you got." Rick felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't planned on fighting today, hell. He hadn't planned on coming here at all. But now, with Tyson standing there, arms crossed, waiting to see if he'd back down, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not again. He shrugged off his jacket. Stepping toward the ring, a younger fighter, probably in his early 20s, was already waiting, rolling his shoulders. Eddie tossed Rick a pair of gloves. 3 rounds. Don't embarrass yourself. Rick pulled on the gloves, his fingers feeling awkward in them. He took a deep breath, stepping forward as the bell rang. The first punch came fast. Too fast. Rick barely dodged, the air whistling past his ear. Before he could react, another shot slammed into his ribs, forcing the breath from his lungs. He stumbled back, cursing under his breath. His opponent smirked. "Too slow, old man." Rick's vision blurred with frustration. He swung wildly, trying to land a hit, but the kid slipped it easily, countering with a crisp jab that snapped Rick's head back. From the corner of the gym, Tyson watched silently. Round 1 belonged to the kid. Rick spat on the mat, shaking his head. His body ached, his pride even more so. But as the bell rang for round 2, something inside him clicked. He wasn't here to win. He was here to fight. The bell rang again, signaling the start of the second round. Rick adjusted his stance, exhaling sharply. He wasn't just going to throw wild punches this time, he needed to think. To fight smarter. The younger fighter came in fast again, confidence in every step, but this time, Rick didn't lunge wildly. He watched, waited. When the kid threw another quick jab, Rick slipped to the side just in time, letting the punch sail past him. For the first time, he saw the opening. With everything he had, Rick drove his fist into the kid's ribs. The satisfying thud of the impact sent a shock through his arm. And the kid grunted, staggering back. A few voices from the gym muttered in surprise. Rick allowed himself a small smirk. "Yeah, I still got something left." The fight continued, back and forth. The kid was younger, faster, but Rick was tougher. He took hits and gave them back just as hard. Every time he got knocked down, he got back up. And Tyson saw it. By the time the final bell rang, both men were breathing hard, sweat dripping onto the mat. The younger fighter had landed more hits. Sure, but Rick was still standing. And that, in itself, was a victory. As Rick stepped out of the ring, shaking the soreness from his arms, Eddie clapped him on the back. "Not bad," he said. "You got heart. That's harder to teach than technique." Rick exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Yeah? Feels like I got my ass kicked." Eddie grinned. "Maybe, but you didn't run." Rick turned his head, locking eyes with Tyson, who had been watching the whole time. The former champion gave a small nod. "Come back tomorrow," Tyson said. "If you're serious." Rick hesitated. He could leave now, go back to the same life, the same anger, the same endless cycle, or he could show up tomorrow. And the next day, and the next. Maybe he didn't need to fight the world. Maybe he just needed to fight for himself. Rick wiped the sweat from his brow, breathing deep. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said, "I'll be here." As he walked toward the door, he felt something strange, something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it.